Bitcoin could be teeing up a bullish reversal, but that raises a bigger question. Was 2025 the real bear year for Bitcoin? Let's jump in and take a look. Hi, I'm Paul with ArcisFX. Make sure you stick around until the end for this week's key levels to watch. But first, we try and answer the question, was Bitcoin's 2025 actually a bear year? Well, firstly, if we look at it in the context of Bitcoin versus USD, the US dollar, the answer is a firm no. Bitcoin 2025 was part of a bull cycle, which started essentially, if you look at this chart, back in the beginning of 2023, almost like clockwork at the end of 2022, which was the bear year. And we have been rising ever since, and looks like we may have peaked in October 2025. And the price action now looks like, having broken this trend, the price action looks like it's lining up for 2026, at least part of it, to be a bear market for Bitcoin versus USD. Bitcoin still could continue up from here, but it's got a lot of work to do. And right now, given the market sentiment, it looks like 2026 is going to be a bear year of some sort for Bitcoin. Whether it is the full 12 months like we had in 2022, Bitcoin's maturity and institutional adoption means that we may not have as serious a dip as we've had previously, which was essentially an 80% retrace on this chart. We may not get that as an example, and just a move from our peaks in October to this lower trend line, which is around 50k, 49k, which is probably the worst case scenario for a bear market, is still less a retrace than the previous one. But the question which is doing the rounds at the moment relates to Bitcoin versus gold. So this is a great chart which James has come up with, and let's just walk through it. So essentially, the bear markets appear to be shrinking with 87, 84, 76 and 50% respectively. And that makes sense, of course, for an asset which is maturing and growing in market cap. So think of Bitcoin as a speedboat when it first started, and now it's a bit like an oil tanker. Bear cycles have been consistently about a year long. So just have a quick look. Yeah, about a year long. There you go, 378 days. And there we go, yeah, about a year. The last cycle had two peaks, so it's questionable where you start that. So bear cycles are consistently about a year long. Now, with the rallies for Bitcoin versus gold, they've been quite explosive, with 11,300% gains, with the law of diminishing returns obviously impacting the next cycle, which was just 1,300%. And then the beginning of this cycle, starting in 2023, has put in 365% gains versus gold. So these amplitudes are stabilizing, with the lesser pullbacks and the higher lows essentially indicative of growing Bitcoin dominance as a reserve asset, just like gold is. Now, we know this, we see this with institutions using Bitcoin as a reserve asset. Strategy Inc. is a perfect example of this. And of course, that isn't news. But what is interesting, if we do get a more prominent divergence from Bitcoin's upwards movement versus gold compared to Bitcoin's movement versus the US dollar. For the percentage gains prediction, which we're looking at now based on these diminishing returns, but also taking into effect the stabilizing factor of Bitcoin's adoption, then potentially we're looking at 55 to 70% move based on these diminishing values, where essentially Bitcoin is gradually absorbing gold's store of value, even though the gains are lesser each cycle. The cycles are smoother. As a result, the drawdowns are smaller and rallies are more predictable. That is all in line with an asset which is becoming mainstream and is growing significantly in size. Of course, Bitcoin is now over $1 trillion in market cap. So based on this chart and these data points, we are expecting 2026-7 to be a blow-off, with Bitcoin increasingly outperforming gold. So this is the point. In 2026, Bitcoin could be in a bull market versus gold, while simultaneously being in a bear market against the US dollar. And this can occur if the US dollar strengthens sharply or gold underperforms. So in nominal USD terms, Bitcoin loses value, but relative to gold, it still gains, reflecting a scenario where Bitcoin outperforms real wealth, even as it declines in fiat terms. And this is another bear market predictive for Bitcoin versus USD, which suggests 49k is the worst possible case. I just want to underscore, this is not a prediction. This is just highlighting general expectations for Bitcoin versus USD for its cycles, and then comparing them to Bitcoin versus gold cycles. And there is now a disparity. And if we have a look at this chart, Bitcoin versus gold correlation, there has the last couple of months been a divergence, with Bitcoin's spot USD price heading significantly lower, while gold is still holding its own. Now, we've had these divergences before, but not in an era of institutional adoption or in an era where Bitcoin was really looked upon as a store of value comparative to gold. So the implication is that Bitcoin versus USD may not hit all new highs in 2026, and we could have a pullback like this, which would equal just a simple retrace back down to this trend line. This is 56k, this is about 54k here as an example. And then once it hits that, maybe halfway through the year, a Bitcoin bull run could resume. Maybe we see something like this. And here we are, that is November 2026, aligning potentially then with the Bitcoin versus gold blow-off phase at the back end of the year. And again, here, if we just look, this is around October 2026 here, and then we could all ride it up together, which would be nice. And then Bitcoin versus gold and Bitcoin versus USD would then have parity again, having diverged for about 6 or so months, right? That's the idea here. And if Bitcoin does continue to outpace gold while Bitcoin is declining versus the US dollar, that would indicate what we've been talking about over the last few weeks in Bitcoin Update, that we may be in for a shorter bear cycle, not necessarily the typical year which we've had previously, as of course this chart, Bitcoin versus gold, underscores that. We could see Bitcoin's USD cycles change slightly to have slightly longer bull runs. And because this recent cycle for Bitcoin has arguably been the longest bull run we've had, right? If you notice here that this bull cycle here in 2016, essentially kicking off in September 15, that lasted around 800 days, similar to the other cycles, despite this chart including this consolidation period at the start of the 2016 bull run. It's undeniable that the 2024-2025 bull run for Bitcoin, when paired with USD, has been the longest yet, which would make sense given institutional adoption. All the dips from Bitcoin are seen as a buying opportunity. So we could see, actually, despite Bitcoin versus gold sticking quite rigidly to its 1 year markdown phase, we could see, thanks to institutional adoption, extended bull runs. So we have more of the 4 year cycle made up of a bull run and less of it made up of a bear cycle. So we could see a bear cycle maybe in 2026 lasting about 6 months, as we were talking about last week. The RSI here, very close to being reset, could be an indication of that. And then as we were talking about with Bitcoin versus gold, instead of having this retrace where Bitcoin doesn't really come alive again until the back end of 2026, what we could see is Bitcoin versus gold continuing up from here, Bitcoin v USD naturally having 4 to 6 months of markdown and or consolidation, and then bullish further resumes on the back of course, the store of value narrative, which if Bitcoin continues up from here compared to gold, and that shortened bear cycle in 2026, potentially led by Bitcoin versus gold being much more bullish, could be the beginning of a brand new phase for Bitcoin, where it decouples from the rest of the crypto market and becomes more of an elder statesman compared to a market king, which it currently is, which would also help explain why the altcoins haven't entered their bull cycle yet. They haven't had an altcoin season yet. So 2025 has been a very interesting year when we look at how Bitcoin has been performing and how the Bitcoin versus gold chart seems to be increasingly relevant compared to USD, essentially fiat currency. And then as a Bitcoin retraces, altcoins start to show their love, and then eventually Bitcoin catches up with them. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment. But what we do know for certain is this bull cycle has been longer than previous. Bitcoin versus gold has not been putting in new highs, whilst Bitcoin versus USD has, highlighting already a divergence of sorts. So the next few months are going to be very interesting. But what I would say is that even though 2026 does look set to open with Bitcoin's US dollar value in question, the long-term store of value narrative for Bitcoin doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. And if we do see Bitcoin versus gold ascending as this chart suggests, bearing in mind, look, 87, 84, 76, 50% retrace, it looks like we're ready to turn around, then we could be very much into a uncharted territory next year, all of which very positive and bullish for the entire cryptocurrency market, especially if altcoins can finally stand on their own 2 feet, where Bitcoin's relevancy compared to USD is questioned, especially considering the potential upside for Bitcoin versus gold in the coming months.
Hi there, I'm James. I'm the founder of ArcisFX. I'd like to personally invite you to join our 24/7 trading group. This is built for traders who want an edge. Inside, you'll get access to live calls on Forex, commodities, crypto, energies, and metals, along with exclusive daily analysis designed to unlock your trading potential. And this in both traditional and now in digital markets. I'm talking Bitcoin, crypto, altcoins, and tethered currencies. You'll gain early access to insider news, real-time updates, real-time support, and premium educational content. If you want to sharpen your skills and boost your success rate, then join me and Paul in this community. This is a fast-growing community of traders who are now writing their own success stories. So don't wait. Join up now. Your edge starts right here.
So the key takeaway from the Bitcoin versus gold chart is this. Some commentators are arguing that Bitcoin beginning to outpace gold, as we think might happen here, invalidates the bearish signals we're seeing from Bitcoin's current performance against the dollar. Now, I'm not sure we should put all our eggs in that basket, as those bearish signals on BTC versus USD remain significant, and we should be exploring either A, scenarios where both premises can play out in tandem, i.e. Bitcoin versus gold ascends while Bitcoin versus USD descends, and B, the possibility that the bullish case for Bitcoin versus gold may soon be invalidated if this line, as an example, fails. So this is a line in the sand we can watch, and of course if Bitcoin versus gold descends below this, then of course that is a bearish signal for this chart that may start to then offset the narrative that we could have a move up from here in the short term. And just remember, Bitcoin is still underperforming gold overall. The only constructive signal we've had is really an historically informed idea, a good one, that Bitcoin's retrace relative to gold might be nearing completion, but that's far from confirmation. So today's thesis is a reminder of how complex the current macro and crypto environment is right now, and that the only guarantee we likely have is that 2026 will not be like 2022, the previous major bear market year. So as new data comes in, the narrative will continue to evolve, so make sure you subscribe and I'll keep you updated. But for now though, let's check in with the key levels to watch this week. So this is Bitcoin 4-hour chart, and the price action has given us the first signal that we may have a trend change in progress. We had a lower low followed by a lower high, which continues the trend, but now thankfully we've had a higher low, which is the first indication of a move from a downtrend to an uptrend. However, in order for that trend change to be confirmed, we need to move up above 93k to surpass this lower high and put in a higher high, which would then allow more buyers to enter the market with a little bit more confidence. So Bitcoin has to get above 89k, which also has confluence with the 3-day 200 MA, and then of course it's got to ascend above 93k to surpass this previous high to put in a higher high, which would be another bullish signal suggesting a reversal is in play. But as you can see, Bitcoin is really struggling to find its feet despite this higher low. So over the next few days, these are the key levels to watch. We have local support below the price action between 81 and 82k. We then have major support below that, which we haven't touched yet, between 73 and 75k. And then the invalidation point would be a close, of course, below 73k, as that will definitely give us a signal that the bearish narrative is going to continue if we move below that. We have local resistance overhead between 89 and 90k, and then we have mid-level resistance at 93k. You can see the price action tap that there, with major resistance sitting overhead made up of the point of control between 96k and 98k. But that's it for now. I'm Paul with ArcisFX. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop us a comment. I'll be back tomorrow with a members-only live stream with James, so if you're not a member, please consider joining us. It's only a couple of bucks. Then I'll be back again on Thursday for a crypto-based live stream and Friday for altcoin gems. And also, if you're not already in our private group, you can check out the link in the description, as we'd love to have you. Catch you in the next one.